So are you talking about the people parking on Phillips?
I'm talking about the assholes that are just driving through.
Okay.
Flaring, this is the rage part. This is
it's a rage podcast.
Yeah,
rage.
we're here. We're here. They're exhaust and they're small penises because they have nothing to show for themselves because they have to drive. And I feel sorry for them, frankly, because that's all you got to do on a Friday night. God.
About a year or so ago, I was browsing YouTube, as I often do, and I came across a channel called Not Just Bikes. And they had some crazy ideas about city development and how cities should be designed and the financing of cities and building cities and all these crazy ideas that I'd never heard before. But what was so strange was this actually started to make sense to me. And so I started digging more into these ideas. And these were popularized by a nonprofit organization known as Strong Towns. And I looked around to see if anybody in Sioux Falls had heard about Strong Towns. And sure enough, I found a group on Facebook that did. So after reaching out to a couple people, I was able to finally get in touch with Jordan Deffenbaugh. And he is now sitting down here with me. Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Yes, you did.
All right, perfect. So we are going to be talking about these ideas of Strong Towns, what it is, and how it affects Sioux Falls. So Jordan, are you ready to rage?
I'm ready to rage.
All right, Let's rage. So tell me, what is Strong Towns?
Well, Strong Towns is a nonprofit organization established by Chuck Marone, who is a civil engineer, urban planner, and now activist. He is actually based out of Brainerd, Minnesota, all of 4 hours away from Sioux Falls. And I suppose really I came across this after he was doing a presentation in Sioux Falls about, I guess it would be 4 or 5 years ago. And he basically does presentations all over the United States and educating people about how to make financially resilient cities. It's somewhat like, when you look at it at face value, it seems like really boring because it's roads, streets, curbs, gutters, really like things that we sort of take for granted. But once you start to dig in, you realize how much money is going in to the investment of this infrastructure, and how some of its designs or the principles of those designs are incredibly problematic for our society.
So problematic in what ways? Can you touch more on that?
Well, so like in terms of how a city is built, you can see a culture's what they value based on like how they organize themselves. And if you look at the square footage of just raw square footage of concrete that's poured for, let's say, cars, like traveling at anywhere from 25 to 65 miles an hour within a city proper, versus infrastructure of like, let's say, of multimodal infrastructure. So walking, bikes, any form of wheeled transport outside of a single car or truck. So you see those manifestations of the dollar, where the dollars are going, and that's what they value. But the thing is what we've done is we've overemphasized and we've over-indexed on that particular transport mode, which now forces people into that mode of, let's say, car ownership, having to navigate a city that is predominantly built for a car. You don't have much access by foot. If you are someone who cannot drive a car, or do not own a car, or don't have access to a license or anything like that, or you're a child, for instance, or the elderly, you cannot properly navigate a city independently.
Sure. So I want to make sure I understand this, what you're saying here. So basically, a city is built with there's land, concrete, things are built, the infrastructure is built to allow people to get from one place to another place. And how you build the infrastructure is going to work for various types of transportation. So what you're building for a car, it works really well for a car, but not really well for someone who's walking by foot, or even a wheelchair as another example. And what works well for someone who's walking by foot or wheelchair, or even some maybe even a bicycle, really doesn't work well for those who are going by car or bus or these larger transportation. Now, we do need this variety of things, because moving people moving furniture, for an example, you can't easily go and move furniture a mile by foot. It'd be. I mean, it's very challenging. It's a much better job for a truck. So we want to have a way for a truck to be able to do that.
Absolutely.
But we also want to make sure that we're not doing that at the expense of people just being able to walk out and just go from point A to point B by foot in a reasonable way. But with the way that we've been investing in the infrastructure in towns and cities, we're starting to overinvest and compromise for cars than what we do for people. Am I understanding what you're saying there correctly?
That is exactly what I'm saying. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess why is this a bad thing, though? I mean, we still have sidewalks, so if people want to be able to walk a bit, we can. And it's allowing us to be able to have much bigger cities. So, I mean, even in Sioux Falls, we now have, it's 4 Walmarts right now that we have that are now getting spread out. They're places where people can go to a single location to get food. It becomes more convenient. So why is this a bad thing that we're putting so much emphasis into cars?
Well, I'm gonna this is my perspective, this is my opinion, my individual way of I use the city, so take that in mind. But the overall wellness of a person is deeply impacted by their capacity to walk independently, to be able to experience a place, a neighborhood. The quality of life question. Now, granted, a lot of people, they love their suburban life. They love their cars. They love their 3-car garage. They love to just pull in and engage and isolate in their house. And people pay for that. The people want that. But I think we are collectively, in terms of how we develop and the ordinances that allow us to create particular cityscapes that are more walkable, we are not, or I should say, the ordinances that are on the books for cities, especially in a place like Sioux Falls, don't allow for walkability to flourish. So those of us that want to engage in a much more integrated lifestyle, where we walk, where we see our neighbors, where we engage at a different scale with a city, is not really allowed to us. I'm advocating for just diversity of lifestyles, really. If people want to have that suburban life, sure, do it. But you should also have to pay for it.
Well, and this is something that I think is one of the things always push back on people when they talk about the suburban life, is even though you just said that people like the suburban life and be able to go to their big house and just drive into their 3-stall garage, is I don't know, how can we say people like it? And I know this sounds horrible thing to say, okay, but just hear me on this. Is that what other options do people have? Well, they do have options, surely. They can go and live in an apartment complex. They can live in townhouses. But again, even in those cases, you're almost exclusively going to be renting in Sioux Falls. I mean, there's not a lot of condo opportunities in Sioux Falls. So you don't have many other options. It's basically you can go and live in this very specific kind of property, these large multifamily properties, or you can go and live in this suburban life. And I think there is a lot of salesmanship, maybe even arguably propaganda, I might add, that is trying to tell people that this is what they should like and this is what they should enjoy.
Yes.
And when we look at the amount of, and this is, again, as you said, my opinion. But when you look at the amount of antidepressants that people are using and the amount of all these other problems, what we're doing is we're starting to isolate people and get people away. And this is one of the big things. I used to be one of the people who was very much on board with the idea that, yes, cars are better. Walking is not the best option. Now, admittedly, at this point, it was because I couldn't drive.
Yeah.
And I'll give I'm going a bit of tangent here, but to give some background, some context here is I was born with cataracts and glaucoma. And so I was not able to get a driver's license until I was 21. And I probably won't be able to keep my driver's license much past the age of 40. I'm about 30 right now. And so it's something that is a very real thing that, frankly, fairly soon, I'm not going to be able to drive.
Yeah.
Maybe I can get beyond that. Maybe I can get to 50. Who knows? But it's something that's going to happen to me a lot sooner than most people, and something that I had to experience, even being a young person. And frankly, it really sucked from a cultural level. But because of this, I was like, well, man, people who can drive are so lucky. I wish I could drive because I wasn't able to have that. Now that I actually have been driving for about 10 years now, I'm starting to see where things are starting to show up these problems. And I went to Europe a couple months ago, and I was in Switzerland, in Zurich, and just what was so amazing to me is, first of all, how easy it was to get around, and on top of that, how you just had people out and doing things, like not out shopping, but they were up. There was the river there, and you would just have people out sitting around by the river, just chatting. Some of them have some food, some wouldn't. Some of them playing guitar. They were just hanging out outside and just enjoying experience with being around people. And this kind of environment is something that you'd only see when there's some kind of big festival going on. Like it does happen, but it's at these very specific times. Like, hey, we're having this festival downtown, so people go and show up and they enjoy people's time. Mm-hmm. But on a daily life basis of where we just, you go outside and you're around people, I think this is something that Americans are really missing. Mm-hmm. And they want to believe that, no, I have the cars, I have the big house, I have the kids, I have a nice job, I have this big, all these things I should have, should make me happy. But for some reason it's not. And so going back to the point I was making, I think the reason why people like it is because they don't know anything different, especially in the Midwest.
You are spot on. It is a cultural experience. Like, if they don't experience the festival, like a Dia de los Muertos, like crazy festival, or like a streetscape in Bogota that's like just teeming with life and experience. If people don't see that alternative because of just virtue of the fact of lack of travel or just being exposed to different cultures, they wouldn't know any better. This place was designed this way. A system is what it does. Mm-hmm. That's by Donella Meadows said that. She is like sort of a pioneer in systems thinking. The whole point in that is the outcomes of a system are its feature. Like, what we are dealing with right now as a society is the nature of the system that we have in place, or the series of nested systems in its place. So as far as like what we're dealing with here, it's a design issue. It's a cultural design issue, and we're manifesting a culture, like not necessarily intentionally, but like we're just dealing with the repercussions of decisions made over the past essentially 170 years, at least in this place. But then, of course, in the case of colonization, 400 years and so forth. Yeah.
So if we're having this idea about that, all these decisions have brought us to this point, and that at least that we have two crazy people in a room in a library downtown that see that there are problems with this system. And I want to get more into some of the problems that were brought up with strong towns. But how do we get to this point? Like if everybody's trying to make good decisions, and we take the idea of a capitalism in a more pure sense, that people make investments and they expect us to return on these investments, and it's going to result in these things. How do we get to this point where we don't see any alternative kind of housing, stuff that we see in Europe, where we have you have a house next to a cafe, next to a bicycle repair shop, next to another house? Like we don't see any of that in the U.S.
That's zoning. That is zoning above all else. We have created a system where basically we're sectioning off land really to sell it effectively. Like that, it's an economy. It's a commodity. We're treating land as a commodity, and we've created a set of ordinances and that basically map what sort of businesses can exist where. Some of those are very relevant. Some of those, like you don't want a sewage facility sitting right next to a trailer park. You want to have like some distance and map things correctly. I mean, and like especially in terms of road and interconnections of transportation and infrastructure, it's very complex. There's so much going on. But where I think a lot of us, and including myself, the journey I've sort of been on, I would say over the past 5 years, I would say, my family has been involved in construction and development. And I've sort of, as I began to really examine that space with the help of Strong Towns, primarily, I began to see kind of the really broken nature of our private property real estate system, and how we are not allowing for naturally occurring communities to happen. Just a real simple example, Sonny's Pizzeria, which is on like 33rd or something like that. It was by USF or
Is it 26th Street? Is it a place?
26 maybe?
Is it the one that's right across the street from like when you drive into the parking lot?
Yes.
I'm pretty sure it's like 26th Street.
Yeah. So this is a really small example.
Yeah.
But it's this little shop, little commercial space, tucked right into the neighborhood, right next to the houses and whatnot. And it's a really great little spot. And when I heard that it was turning into a pizzeria, I was so excited because I was like, this is what you want. You want these like little small restaurant gathering spaces. These are like so important for neighborhoods and community building. Well, I found out that they went to apply to the city and they wouldn't let them have a deck oven because it was in a neighborhood. They wouldn't allow them to have like exhaust from like a electric oven. You can do. I mean, I'm in pizza, this and whatnot. So, but you can do any number of like different setups, but they wouldn't allow them to do this and vent it out. Which I think about how many neighborhood pizzerias I've eaten at that have had venting in the area. Yeah. But yet they couldn't conceive of this fact that, based on the zoning and the parameters that they had set up, they wouldn't allow them to do it. And now that's just a real small thing.
Yeah.
Now when we get into the space of like parking minimums or like allowing for multifamily in a single family neighborhood, which once we begin to sort of dig down into like single family residential at large and why were the decisions made to make single family a thing in the United States, we begin to realize that it has a lot to do with socioeconomic caste.
Sure.
Basically, I mean, racism. It was directly tied to segregating cities.
Well, from what I understand of that, I don't know incredibly a lot about that. So I want to give my thoughts on this, on how that would happen, and maybe you can correct me. So from what I understood, basically after World War II, you had a bunch of people coming back. We had a lot of wealth, and it was a case where they started developing these suburbs. And they started, again, this is where propaganda comes in about the American dream, about living in a suburb. We had cars so that were readily available. People were able to start now commuting into cities more. So it wasn't something that you had to be as close to your job as you used to be able to. This is where we also, I don't even want a highway system. I think it was this same time the highway system, like the interstate system, started being developed to facilitate that.
Yeah, it was the Eisenhower interstate system. So it would have been in the 50s.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. And so, it was something that where this is what, and I always have a hard time, and I'm willing to be challenged on this, but I always have a hard time if I do say intent versus result. So what I'm saying is, it would make sense from very purely just like people's motivations, where you would have these white people who have a higher socioeconomic standing. They have the ability to go into these neighborhoods and they move out. Then we have the black neighborhoods, the black people who are still in these cities who don't have that ability to do it as much. And so it ends up being a case where, and yes, I'm sure that there were, like, I know about redlining and blockbusting, a lot of these things that would play into this. And so I'm sure a lot of those practices were definitely more towards, again, had more racist intent. But what am I missing there? Or is that pretty good?
I think I think this is a complex issue.
Sure.
And absolutely, like, there is like, oh yeah, you move out there. Well, and you also have subsidies that were actively like buoying those infrastructure projects, and then plus like to say the GI Bill and like just general housing. And
I'm sorry, I just realized I had to look at my time to make sure I'm not gonna miss my cars.
No, you're good.
Reveal that.
So I think individual. So before we were recording this, we talked a little bit about individual rationality and collective irrationality.
Yeah.
It's individually, yes, take advantage of that reduced home loan, that free money essentially to get this house and get that white picket fence and like this idyllic world. And they're of course being shoveled propaganda and as developers creating these sort of commercials and things. But one of the earliest suburbs in the United States was a place called Mission Hill in Kansas City. That was advertised as a white exclusive neighborhood. It was one of the earliest ones. The developer, I think his last name was Nichols. That developer actually consulted on the Housing Act in the 1940s. So we have a issue where these ideas of single-family residential, the earliest versions of them, including in Berkeley, which was around the turn of the century, and where estates were started to like emerge, they had racist intent. Those initial earliest manifestations of the idea.
So I want to keep a timeline here. So we're trying. The whole point we're trying to get to again is just how do we? What are the decisions that brought us to where we are today?
Yeah.
And so if we're looking back at again after World War II, we had all the things that were going in the 50s, where this was a big push to start getting people into suburbs, separate people based off race. So we had the blacks stay inside the cities, and we had whites going into the suburbs away from the cities. And start selling this, or again, I really think it's more propaganda. I think it's very fair to call it propaganda.
It's propaganda.
Yeah, that the ideal way of living is in these single-family houses in the suburbs.
Yeah,
exactly.
These
with the white picket fences, and
so it's easier to make money off of that. If you're living in a integrated city, like if integrated community, like for me. How I like to model my life is to be as localized as possible, to engage with my neighborhood, to be actively focused on the people around me. I love seeing my neighbors every day. I love being able to walk through the neighborhood and see someone. I love dropping some soup I made at a friend's house and vice versa. And we work together. And that sort of bond of that is developed by like being in a somewhat integrated neighborhood, forces you're much more resilient. Whereas if you're isolated in this nuclear family concept, it's sectioned off pieces of land, that is way more extractive and way more profitable for like particular extractive industries to take advantage of. The automobile industry, the mortgage industry, which mortgages are products, is what they are. Just real estate, then all the associated products for maintaining said property, that investment. And so, I think it was sold to people, they engaged in it, but is incredibly extrtive.
Well, when we talk about strong towns, it seems like there's wow, let me try talking again. The idea again is to have, as it says, strong towns.
Yeah.
And one of the things we've talked about here is the idea of the social aspect. And I think that there's a lot of other aspects I wanted to talk about. But so when we talk about the social aspect, if we can have towns where people are interacting with one another. I think, again, we can look at the polarization that we have in the United States right now. Like, it is ridiculously polarized. Maybe, this is a crazy thought, part of it is the fact that we're not actually talking to our neighbors. We're not out being around other people. And it's like we get shoved into Costco and try and go through things as quickly as possible. And on that same idea, we also have the, like, this is, again, going back to my experiences in Europe.
Yeah.
When I was in Montenegro, and it was really cool to see that you'd just have these houses and in these small coffee shops or bars and restaurants, and these are not your Denny's, like these big places that are chained. Like, these are just small little places. They have a unique restaurant. They have a couple things on there. I was also in Serbia, and like there was a restaurant. It's just called Question Mark. It's just that's all it is. It's the oldest restaurant in Serbia, or maybe even all of Balkans. It was started around the time of the Civil War in the United States, to give people comparison. So around for a good deal of time.
Yeah.
And it's just been same restaurant since then. But it's a small place, has just this not a very big menu. It's a small place that's been able to hold up this all time. And you don't see, there are some of these chain places like that, they do exist, but they're not there like you see in the United States. And I think the reason why this matters is for a couple of reasons. First of all, we have the social aspect, like you're saying, is if I want to go and get coffee from where I live, technically there is a coffee place that is within walking distance from where I live, but it is not, their hours aren't great, and I'm going to be honest, I just don't particularly like it. But it's only one. Like, it's not like I have a bunch of options. So I will typically have to get into my car and drive to go out, and again, assuming I'm not making it at home, I have to go out and drive to get to the coffee shop. And then when I'm there, I have a choice. Do I go in and drink the coffee, or do I go through a drive-through? Well, if I'm already in the car, maybe I'm going to do some other things. I'm going to go through a drive-through. The idea of like, again, going back to the Balkans, with Serbia and Montenegro, the culture there, and same thing with Croatia, all these former Yugoslavia countries, is that if you're going to drink coffee, it is expected that you sit down and take 2 hours to drink the cup of coffee. That's just what the culture is. You don't have drive-through coffee. But this creates it where, going back to the social idea, strong cultures, that if you have all these local shops, these local, like these small little grocery stores, these small little coffee shops, small little restaurants that are nearby within walking distance, you start seeing the same people there again and again. You start recognizing people. I go to a coffee shop fairly regularly that's nearby where I drop my kids off in the morning. And the people know me there. They know what my order is. They recognize me. And it's a great feeling that most people don't get to experience, because they're always driving out these places, going to drive-throughs, all these things. And I think this social aspect is really important. But I want to get into also the financial aspect, is that if you have a restaurant, let's do, again, coffee shops that are easier, but this is, say you have a Starbucks. Like, we can count the number of Starbucks that we have, and they're fairly large operations, like, relatively speaking. They're not these small little coffee places. Like, when I was in New York City, you would have these coffee carts that would have every single coffee cart. These small places, they would have fantastic coffee. It was amazing. But here in the Midwest, again, particularly, we have these fairly large coffee shops that have big parking lots. They have drive-throughs. They're these places they're big places, and they employ a lot of people. But it also creates it where they because it's a Starbucks and there's multiple brands. If you don't like Starbucks, you're not going to go to that particular coffee shop. But again, comparing it to what I experienced myself in Europe, you have a lot of these small, no brand name, just these local mom and pop coffee shops. And maybe you don't like that particular one. That's fine. You can go to another one. And it creates these diversity of options and more stability within the local economy as well. So what are your thoughts on more going to talk about the financial aspects? What are your thoughts about how the finances of strong towns work?
Well, the finances of strong towns are really, it's about incrementalism, small investments. It's about allowing a city to grow organically. It's really the biggest thing about strong towns, I think, from the financial standpoint, that has been eye-opening, is like just how much of a racket much of our infrastructure projects are. Like, for instance, like our roads, our streets in particular, are about $1 million a mile to like build them. And then you have the costs of maintaining them. And as we are beginning to notice in over like every winter, they're deteriorating faster, it seems like. It seems like there's more potholes. It seems like that it's just becoming worse. And probably because of like just increased moisture and like the fact that we live in South Dakota and it's going to go through extreme temperature shifts.
Sure.
So like we have to also accept the reality that as we grow and sprawl, things are going to become more expensive to maintain those, what are essentially liabilities. So by building at that scale, we're setting ourselves up for massive financial ruin at some point in our future, just by the sheer volume of scale.
Well, and I think one of the important parts is, where does the money come for building that infrastructure?
It's borrowed, and it's borrowed against taxpayer dollars.
And it's, well, or it comes even from the federal government.
Yeah.
So this is one of the big things I remember from Strogtowns they're talking about, is that you'd have these, let's say you have this town and they want to go and expand out, build some more suburb areas. And so they can get money from the federal government to go and make it. So it's very cheap to actually build it out. The problem is they're not getting that money to maintain it.
No.
And this is the bigger issue. So it creates this very perverse incentive where they can go and start building out all this additional infrastructure, and they get the tax revenue from that. But 20 years on the road, 30 years, whatever it may be, whatever that time frame for the maintenance comes, sooner or later we're going to get to the point where, well, we now have to go and start fixing these roads and start fixing this infrastructure. And when we get to that point, well, the government, the local government, the city doesn't have the money to go do it. And the amount of taxes we're getting from those houses that are there are not enough. They will never be enough. Like it's if we actually had to tax people what they're costing for the infrastructure, nobody would be able to afford it.
Those federal subsidies basically put everything out of scale. Like it's like let's say there's a interchange that's like going to come to like off of an interstate.
Yeah.
And they say it's basically the responsibility of that city that's next to it to build that. It's oftentimes built out of scale, both in the size, like the literal size of it, and then the line item on the spreadsheet of that dollar amount. It's like out of scale. And I think that's a...
So I don't quite understand what you mean by the dollar amount. Is it saying that they fluff up the amount of money it costs? Or
No. I'm saying, like, well, in a way, yes, because we have a civil engineering industry that's incentivized to have big projects, both in the sense of that dollar amount, because you want a bigger cut, right? But then there's also the civil engineers designing these streets, designing these interchanges that are completely out of scale and focused on what is called levels of service. You can find this on the internet. Wikipedia has a really great description of it. It is basically the core of what dictates civil engineering in this country, which is basically a grading scale of the different levels of speed in a service of like essentially how fast a certain level or volume of cars go through. The problem is that we're incentivizing as fast as possible travel above all else, which means big infrastructure projects that are not only incredibly expensive, and we have to pay the liabilities on that over the however many decades, but incredibly dangerous for pedestrians, incredibly dangerous for motorists too.
Yeah.
Like what? I mean, I haven't even checked the figures on like road accidents in the last year, but I can guess it's really damn high. Like, so what we're seeing here is we have too much money coming into places that are essentially we're building out of scale for communities. And I think Strong Towns is all about, okay, what are the strong investments we can make? What are the smart investments that we can make with our dollars that are probably small? They're not super grand scale silver bullet projects that solve everything. They're more incremental, neighborhood based. I think the biggest thing that I've gotten from Strong Towns in understanding all of this is that we need to bring our focus much more locally, and bring down our scale of what we think solutions look like.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And this is where, again, I've talked before on this podcast where, again, I'm not a fan of government. I'm
Same.
basically, if you want to put a label on it, I can basically be considered an anarchist. And so I just don't think that government provides any actual real solutions, and they cause more problems. And what I really don't like is that when I look at the way cities are built and these problems, it is a very much top down. That you have these federal dollars coming into the state or down to the cities, and all these things that are allowing these big projects to be built. As you said, these silver bullet projects, or these things that are going to make big differences and big impacts. And the people who are living them, it doesn't necessarily go towards their livability. A lot of it goes to, all right, we need to get more tax dollars, so if we can just fix this problem immediately. And again, because we have politicians locally who they're not going to be in office, 20 years from now when they have to deal with those problems. They want to go on and oftentimes do other things, maybe go into, the broader state, become a governor or senator or something like that. And so they want to go and do the flashy thing now and not deal with those consequences. And so to me, it seems like it's this top-down government that is really affecting it. And what I like about Strong Towns is it's very much focused on start from the bottom, start from the actual livability thing. Let's start with people walking from point A to point B, be able to get some food from a local place. And then if we want to start looking at bigger things, because even on the tax side of things, this is the other thing that really surprised me, is when I think we were talking about before, I think you mentioned it briefly, was the taco shop. Do you want to talk more about how the taco shop works?
So to kind of bring it back to Strong Towns specifically, Chuck wrote this article, got to be like maybe 10 years ago. It's like his most popular article and sort of what shot.
And I'll link it in the description, so if anybody wants to find this article, I'll make sure it's linked in the description.
Yeah, check it out. It's a really great, because some of this, I'm not a financially minded individual. I'm not like that. I'm a much different type of thinker than, say, Chuck. But that's why I appreciate Chuck, because Chuck really nails down like the math. It's all about doing the math. And in this case, there's this article about this Taco Bell that the city of Brainerd basically approved building permits. And I think they got, I forget the whole details of the story, but like just the investment that was put in to allowing this Taco Bell to function. And what he discovered is the tax value of the Taco Bell was considerably less than this block that had been built on it was like a strip mall in 1930 that it was built. And it was like kind of like a little rough shape, but functioning businesses, no vacancies. And it was producing like $400,000 more in tax revenue. Like it was an absurd amount of just like tax generation. And it's because of the density of the block.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if I remember some details on that, there's basically two blocks. They're comparable in the amount of infrastructure they had. The street on the same street. They were very close to each other. The buildings they're built very cheaply back in like the 1920s, 1930s, somewhere around there. So like Depression era kind of stuff. The other one was a brand new taco shop that had big parking lot, green spaces, the setbacks, all the things that are required based off current zoning laws. And so even though this taco shop would be considered what we expected of the zoning laws and everything that we have nowadays, it was getting 40% less tax revenue.
Yes.
And so comes to the problem that all these policies, and a big part of this is, again, the incentivization to be driving cars. And again, I drive cars. I understand it's a necessity. when you look at other countries, go again, like my experience in Zurich. Yes, a lot of people drive cars in Zurich, but you don't have to. A lot of people are taking buses and trams and electric scooters and all these different things. And but because they had to make sure of all these parking lots, because that's what the zoning law said. The other place, they just had street parking. And again, also what happens is, let's even look beyond this taco shop. When you have a place like, well, Kmart here in Sioux Falls, when you have a Kmart that goes out of business, what goes inside that shop? Like if you have these small little shops that were in this one block that was built in the 1920s, 1930s, they would have a lot of different businesses. Some would work and stay there. Some wouldn't. They'd fail. And another business would come and take that place. But you don't have that with a place like Kmart.
And to that point, it's an ecosystem. Yeah. Like there are six shops, right? One goes out of business. Well, there's 5 other shops, but people still go to. And there could be a plucky entrepreneur that wants to pay for a small shop, and it's negligible rent in the space of like as compared to a Kmart. Then they can try it out. When we build at this massive scale, out of human scale, I would call Kmart out of human scale. We have all these issues of when things don't work out. Like in our system of scale, everything has to work really well, as we discovered with the pandemic and our massive failure of our supply chains. We were built so out of scale and everything had to function so well. But then, oh no, a boat gets stuck in the Suez Canal. So I don't know. Anyway.
Well, yeah, I mean, and this is something I also noticed. I mean, even on the Facebook page, I went and said, hey, I think it'd be really cool if we got rid of cars on Phillips. And it was really interesting. It's interesting seeing people's reaction to that. And but the big thing that I really noticed, again, when you compare places where people walk more and places where people drive, is when I'm driving my car, I'm going to go and drive to a place. So I'm not driving, like, yes, I'm passing a bunch of businesses, but I'm not stopping in and saying, oh, I wonder what this business has to offer. When you are in a position where you're walking and you're just passing by businesses, it is so easy to stop in and say, hey, I wonder what this place is like. This is the reason why we have so many chain restaurants, is because it is so incredibly difficult to get someone to go and try a new restaurant for the first time. Like, the most difficult customer to get is a person who's never been in your restaurant before. Now, if they come in your restaurant and are like, yep, not my thing, they're probably not going to come back. But they're still more likely to come back than they were the first time they came in. Whereas if you just have it where people can easily stop in and look at the menu, like you again,
check it out,
go to places,
scout it.
Exactly.
Just see it. Like, and actually, it's proven. It's economically proven that a walkable community generates more tax dollars, more economic value, more higher property values. It's like across the board.
Yes.
And it's just like, that's what's so absurd that I find.
And people, even business owners, they're fighting it like, no, people need to have their cars to get to my place.
That's just trauma. That's just trauma. That's all that is. I get really fed up. And actually, okay, so I want to speak to that comment in the Facebook group because I think it's a really revealing thread about cultural values, but also how we tackle challenges. And so Philip, the comment was about basically pedestrian malls. And the idea of what if we closed off Phillips for a section of Phillips, like let's say, like I think it was like 9th to 12th Street or some variation of that.
I think the way I framed it up, it was up to 8th Street and then down to 13th Street is where I think it was. And it was also only going to be from May through September was my proposal. Again, it was just a thing I was throwing out there, but that's my proposal.
And I think, here's the thing, it's like, there was all the talk, we tried the thing in the 70s where we had a pedestrian mall, which it didn't work, yes, but there was a multitude of reasons, not just the fact of the pedestrian mall. But I was like, I keep, in these conversations, I keep throwing this out there, but I don't know if people are listening or think about it. But there's this thing called I might be butchering this, it's a Dutch concept called a Woesterf. Yeah, I think. I can put it in the comments. I probably butchered that. But it is a shared living street. So in the Netherlands, it is very common that you would have like a pavered street that is close to cars, like in the evening hours, like when people are out going to restaurants. But then past a certain point, let's say midnight or like 2 o'clock in the morning, it opens up for cars, and it stays open for cars for most of the day. And so I kept, in these conversations when we talk about closing it down, I'm like, hey, you can do both.
Yeah.
We can design this that we can have both outcomes can be generated. Mm-hmm. Like, we get so fixated on like, no, it can only be for the car. No, it can only be for the pedestrian. It's like, no. There are ways to design this. And I just think why do we have to wait 20, 30 years for something to come about when we know it works elsewhere and we can point to it? And we have examples of, say, pavered streets that have shared, like, I mean, go to Santa Fe, go to Denver. Denver has one. There's in Boulder. I mean, there's so many examples of how to do this more effectively, but yet we just keep constantly discussing segregation of the different modes of transportation. But
it comes to this. I think part of it, I love walking downtown in the summer. Well, I love walking downtown almost any time. I'm one of the people who I actually enjoy walking out in the cold even. And again, I even mentioned before, like when I couldn't drive, I was riding my bike everywhere. I've literally ridden my bike in blizzards. I'm not afraid of the weather. Yeah. So I'm one of these crazy people. But especially in the summer when it's so lively, you have people out busking on the streets and stuff. It's a great place to be. My kids love going down there, walking there. But the one thing that I really dislike about downtown is you have all these trucks and all these people in these vehicles that are just they're loud, and it creates a bunch of additional fumes and stuff that are just, it's not pleasant. And there's a lot of restaurants that are downtown, and it's enjoyable to just sit out at an outdoor restaurant and have a drink, have some food, just be there. But then you have these vehicles right next to you that are just blaring. It just seems like it's like, can people? It is frustrating.
It is very frustrating.
Can we just imagine something could be different, and how this could be such tourism is a big spot downtown.
I don't understand why the city, and I know that this has been brought up a lot at downtown residents meetings and things like that. Uh-huh. Business owners are fed up with it. I know the people that I frequent Phillips. I work in an establishment that's on Phillips. I also frequent many of the bars that are there. I know the people that own those bars, and I know the people that sit at those bars. And we are done with the damn trucks. They don't spend money downtown. They drive through. It's just another loop. So why isn't the city acknowledging the concerns? Because I do know that they've been brought up. And it's so frustrating that I don't see police officers there let's think about the investment of our tax dollars and where we want them going. I want my tax dollars going to arresting people. I don't like the police, sorry. But if I wanted to go somewhere, I want it to be ticketing and removing those assholes from the street. I'm sorry, but it's insane. Why do we have to glorify? And it's because of
So you're talking about the people parking on Phillips?
I'm talking about the assholes that are just driving through. Okay. Lauren, this is the rage part. This is
it's a rage podcast.
Yeah,
rage.
We're here. We're here. They're exhaust and they're small penises because they have nothing to show for themselves because they have to drive. And I feel sorry for them, frankly, because if that's all you got to do on a Friday night, God. I'm just done with the city just like I'm done with the city making excuses about this. The most obvious thing to do would be to close that off, or have some form of police presence monitoring that, or doing anything like that. But of course, they're not.
Well, okay, so how can you, in a very practical sense, if you just are in a vehicle, it's not a commercial vehicle, and you are driving down Phillips, I mean, what is the illegal aspect of it? What would they be ticketed for?
I mean, I guess disturbing the peace would probably be the best way to put it. Like I'm going to say this. I've sat along and just having the blare of a truck exhaust.
Yeah.
That is just insane. And I'm just like, I want to slash their tires.
And motorcycles too.
And motorcycles too. Yeah. Oh my God. It's just like, why do we have to put up with this shit? And it's just like, close it down Fridays and Saturday nights.
There we go. That's what we need.
Like,
have signs up and start an ordinance that there's a, because I understand it's something that they actually do. You mentioned in Netherlands. It's something that they do in Netherlands as well. They have what is that?
Sound ordinance or
sound ordinance. Sound pollution. Sound pollution. That's what it is.
Yep.
Where they have, well, again, not everywhere, but there's some places, at least in Netherlands, that do this, where they'll have ordinance about max sound allowed. And so basically it's a case where again, I'm not sure exactly how you would be able to measure that and enforce it, because I'm sure you're going to have people saying, well, mine wasn't that loud. It was so, but I agree.
It's become too much. Like, it's just like, it's such an obvious thing. And like, granted, this is out of all the things that I'm angry about.
Yeah.
This is like a small thing.
Yeah.
But I think it connects to a larger issue in that, like, we have residents that are paying to be on that street. They are purchasing and engaging in commerce, engaging in behaviors that I would think the city would thumbs up to, because they're getting their cut, at the end of the day. And they're actively just letting, say, a group in their cars, in their trucks, just blare and just make their, like, I don't know, just showcase their aggression to the world. I don't know what's wrong with them. Obviously, trauma.
I don't understand truck culture at all. So.
It's an absurd culture, and it's not to be valued, quite frankly. Fuck it. I
drive an electric car because that way it doesn't make any noise. Like, I'm like on the complete other spectrum of things.
I'm just done bowing down to these fucking idiots.
Yeah.
And it's just like, we need to. I am personally advocating, like, I will gladly close down any street any day of the week, because honestly, it's absurd. The streets are for the people, and that the fact that we do not allow people to actively use it, it's only fucking cars, is absurd. It's fucking absurd.
And this is another important part. You mentioned before about how there's always emphasis about trying to get more speed out of transportation, and this is a big. They're not placing the emphasis in the correct spot.
No.
It shouldn't be about speed. It should be more focused on getting them more people through.
Volume.
The volume of people.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, again, when you have these massive trucks that are out driving, and there's not 20 people in these, like a bus might.
It's one person.
One person sitting in this big,
one
massive
small-dicked person.
Exactly.
The design. Like the fact, they're changing Phillips Avenue. They're redesigning Phillips Avenue.
Yeah.
And they're angling parking on Phillips Avenue. This is in the design they've showcased, and the city showcased. And they're adjusting the degrees of the angles of the parking. The reason why is because of long bed trucks. So they're widening the road, which will also increase the speeds on that road, mind you, of a heavy pedestrian area, and they're widening the road so that more long pickup trucks can fit in there. And it's absurd. We're like constantly designing around these fucking insecure pieces of shit. Sorry. No, not sorry.
Sorry, not sorry.
Just sorry, not sorry. I fucking hate trucks. I get if you have to, like, your job is like moving stuff, I get it. But if you're just some dipshit from the suburb who like occasionally you throw your kid's bike in the back or you're hauling your boat to the river, it's like, fuck you. We don't need to fit your damn fucking truck down here. We don't need your business. We got plenty of us use our fucking legs, and it's just like, it's like, why is it even considered a form of masculinity either? You're like in a truck. Your body's not doing anything. You're probably a fat ass. Like, it's just.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. And because then the next thing they go and do is they say, "Oh, I can't walk." Like, we were talking about this beforehand. That how resistant. Like,
you're so weak. You're so weak. You can't walk. You can't use your legs. Yeah. But you're a man.
Go to Costco, go to Walmart, and these big box stores. And what do you have? You have these, or Shields, probably more accurate. But you have these people driving around these trucks around the parking lot. Like, I got to get the perfect spot right next to the door. I got to be so close to it, even though there's plenty of parking spot way at the the end. But no, I got to be right there as close as I can, and I got to back into the parking spot because it's so hard for me to back out later on because I have such a massive truck, and then because I can't be suffered to walk an extra 100 feet. But once they get inside the store, it's like, how far are you walking? You're walking miles when some of these stores. Like my wife, she has one of the watches that will count the steps, and it's like you're walking a lot of stores. It's not a big deal. People do it, but somehow walking outside and in the fresh air, in sunlight, it's like, are people gotten to the point where nature is now the thing that they're afraid of?
Yes.
And if they are, that's the problem. This is the problem.
They are terrified of nature. They're absolute, like, our culture is so terrified of nature. We don't engage in it.
No.
And like in talking about like cold weather, like I came here in a jumpsuit. I walk 365 every single day. I do not own a car. I'm glad I don't own a car. There are some issues with that lifestyle choice, but I live with it, and quite frankly, my life is better for it. And the absurdity. I think it's people telling themselves these stories, these narratives to make themselves feel good, because if they accept reality, if they accepted what it actually was doing, they'd have to engage with the fact that their life is a lie. And I get so frustrated by the idea that it is somehow weak to walk. That is insane.
And this is the other thing that really, one of the videos I want to be making is a video of me just taking a bus in Sioux Falls. Yeah. I haven't done it yet, but this is a big thing that really frustrates me, is how walking is considered a thing of the poor people. Buses are they're there for the poor people. We don't need to have on-time buses. We don't need to have enough make bus routes make sense.
Poor people don't need to make money.
It's just for the poor people. If they actually cared, they wouldn't be poor. And again, I know I keep going back to Europe because this is the best thing where I can actually say my lived experience about how different things are. Like when I was riding a bus, I was in Montenegro. I was going from these two towns. It was about an hour ride for the whole trip. So I was on a bus for this whole ride. Now, everybody there is speaking Serbian, and I don't speak enough Serbian to really understand what they're saying. But the amount of liveliness that was in the bus, because it's not a thing where poor people ride buses there. It's what you do.
People ride buses.
You just ride a bus because that's how you get from point A to point B.
Because it makes sense.
Exactly.
It's well designed. Like,
it works.
Yeah.
Wow. And even like I ran into some people. They were some people who just moved there. They actually moved there from Florida, and so they actually spoke English. But they had a car. They could have driven that same distance, but they decided to take a bus because it's not a miserable thing to do. And again, this isn't even comparing. Like, I'm not going to say that the bus in Montenegro was the nicest bus in the world. Okay, I mean, but. It's not a very big country. It's not like a Western country. If you go to, again, someplace like Zurich, oh my gosh, riding in a bus in Zurich was a treat.
Oh yeah.
Like it just again, I don't speak Swiss German, so I don't know what they were saying. But you having these conversations around and just the culture of it, and you don't see. It's not that you're seeing these people who are, I'll say the kind of people who ride buses in the Midwest. I'm not trying to disparage them, but again, it's because we have this idea that poor people ride buses. You see people waiting by a bus. They look a particular way. You don't see that in Switzerland. You see people in suits. You see very well dressed, very fashionable people who are probably working at a Swiss bank, riding in buses. Someone who would never if they were in the Midwest, they would never be caught dead riding a bus because it's for the poor people. Mm-hmm. It's lower class. And I really dislike this culture about how walking and taking alternative forms of transportation is beneath people, or riding a bicycle, and how it's freaking dangerous.
I think for those people, they're insecure. Those people, the admonish people at others for anything.
Yeah.
For, like, in that regard, is like, it's a deep insecurity of like thinking that this person is walking, this person is engaging in this other form of transport. They're different. Mm-hmm. They're like, and I just, it's this deep, well, you know what it's actually more deeply tied to is the space of monoculture. We have monoculture mindsets here. It's like one type of thing, put it in rows. Now we have corn. Like same thing with houses.
Yeah.
It's a similar crop, you know? It's just a different financial model. And it's like we don't think in biodiversity, and we think in these very monoculture terms, and that then determines how we deal with our challenges. So that's how they're going to think. We need to design for cars. We need to design for, we're going to build this same type of house plan over and over again. We're going to have apartments that are just in lines, and we're going to just treat everything the same.
Yeah.
In that sort of like proposed average. And like we were talking about diversity of housing, we do have what is called a missing middle in this country. The missing middle when it comes to housing is just different forms of typologies between the single family and the multiplex, which there are many, 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 many types. In fact, look it up. missingmiddlehousing.org, I think is what it is. Really great resource in exploring this idea. But I think there's missing middle across all facets of our society.
Oh, yeah.
Massive, massive spaces where we're missing like the things that we need to be living in a functioning society. Or we've reduced everything down so far to the point where we've like removed so much of the human experience of just like, we need social collisions. We need to be engaged with people. We need to see our fellow humans. We need to commiserate. That's a healthy life.
Yeah.
What
we've done is we replaced all that with going online. And I guess it's getting away from the idea of strong towns, but that's fine. We can let things go where it goes.
Yeah, this is usually, we have strong towns conversations every week, Wednesdays at the Source, and this is usually how we start with let's talk about this article, and then we're getting into the full spectrum of the human condition in relation to public space.
And this is the thing, all these things matter. They all
do
relate to one to another, and again, I don't want to talk about social media, but even if we look at the towns, we talk about the infrastructure. One of the things that from Strong Towns that really shocked me too was the idea that the amount of maintenance costs for water systems and for sewage systems is insane. And
it is insane.
One of the other areas, we talk about these little subcultures, and one of the subcultures that I have a bit of interest in is the idea of prepper culture. And my wife, she is she grew up in the Soviet Union. And so she went through the collapse of the Soviet Union, and she experienced things firsthand, where they would have to have their bathtub full of water at all times because they never knew if that might be all the water they have for a week and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So my wife, she's experienced this firsthand. I've heard about these stories. I understand this stuff we should take seriously. So I start digging into things about the prepper culture, and one of the things that really concerns me, people talk about issues of food and water, those are serious issues, but sewage maintenance is one of the things almost no one talks about.
Yep.
And it's something.
What do you do with this shit?
We have 200,000 people in the city of Sioux Falls, not including Brandon and T and Harrisburg, all these places,
which are integrated into our system.
Yeah, it literally is a lot of shit that we have to deal with. Okay, and sure, like I might even be able to come up with some solutions for myself, but what about everybody else? Like it is a very serious thing. Now, when we look at, again, what Strongtown talks about is the issue, is that the cost of maintaining these sewage systems for all these single-family houses, it is too expensive. Like the amount of tax revenue that's coming from these places doesn't make sense. It doesn't work to maintain these sewage systems, which is, again, why we always have to be going and building this Ponzi system, this Ponzi scheme of more building, more suburbs, more. So we can constantly pay for the depreciating sewage systems and the depreciating infrastructure by the new tax revenue from places that are brand new, so there is no maintenance on it. And so now there is a solution to this, and the solution is, instead of having a centralized sewage system, have a decentralized where everybody has a septic system. Mm-hmm. And again, there's challenges with septic systems. I get that. But again, there are solutions to these problems if we address that there actually is a problem, and we don't actually keep trying to push down the same issue again and again and again.
I'm going to comment on the word solution. And this actually came from a book called Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb, who actually inspired Chuck Marohn to, he heavily influenced Chuck Marohn. And in his book, a very impactful phrase stuck out, and that is, there are no solutions, only strategies to mitigate outcomes. And I think that's the issue here is, like, oftentimes we focus on, like, we got the solution, single family homes. That's what we're going to do. And we stop there. Mm-hmm. Or we got the solution. We're going to centralize our sewage. Like, we don't think in strategies, that continued strategies over an infinite span of time. And we have to adjust and respond into the outcomes of those things. And I think part of it too is, if we're engaging sort of in governmental sense, we're constantly making marketing schemes to validate what we want to do. And like a strategy isn't necessarily sexy. What's sexy is this big shiny water treatment plant that we're going to build. We're going to fix everything and everything's going to be fine. And it's just, I think we don't allow for complexity, and actually that's a key delineation, I think, too, for strong towns, and Chuck would validate this as well. Cities are complex; they're deeply, deeply complex. Mm-hmm. But we, as humans, especially Western thinkers, try to treat them as complicated. Complicated is like a machine. It is like there are interacting parts. If you remove a part, the machine may stop working, and then you put the part back in, and now it does. Put the bolt, put the gear, whatever. A complex system, you could remove a part, but the system's still going to function. However, if you removed the bus system from Sioux Falls, it's not going to just stop functioning. Mm-hmm. It'll just morph into something else. Probably not something very ideal for a good portion of our population, but it's still going to continue. And I think we have to recognize that we are dealing in complex systems with human behaviors that are deeply integrated with their environments. We cannot reduce it to a spreadsheet. We cannot reduce it to a checklist. I think I wanted this. This might be a segue to this, but I just wanted to say this within this interview, and like just to explain some of my frustrations with how we do things around here and how maybe it's done else in other places. I went ice skating yesterday. I went ice skating at McKinnon Park. This is the fancy park in town, right? So they had free skating that weekend. Awesome. I'm all for that. That's super great. It's a great service. go to the place. There is no sign to where to pick up skates, where to grab them. You go in, you don't really know where to put your shoes. You get the skate. I didn't even know that it was free. I was going to pay the $3 or whatever. But it's like, you didn't really know what was going on. And then you go out, and there's no place to sit around the skating rink. Somebody pulled like a table, like a picnic table, down at an angle along the bridge. It was just like, we're skating around. It's like, why not? Like, you're going to do this.
Yeah.
You're going to invest in this. Why not do it well? Like, why not, like...
Was it done by the city government that did it?
Yeah, it was the Parks and Rec.
And this is the thing that I keep coming back to.
Yeah.
Is that all these problems we're talking about,
Yeah.
they're coming from centralized planning.
Yes.
They're coming from politicians, from people who want to be elected. And so it's not about making good decisions. It's about getting reelected. It's about being popular.
Yeah.
It's about stuff that you can sell and brand and say, oh yes, we're having all these cool things in the city of Sioux Falls. Because this is again why I am anti-government. Now again, reason why I have a hard time saying I'm all the way to anarchism is because I understand that if you have an anarchist society, if you just get rid of all government, government is going to start forming up in smaller blocks. That's why I'm saying we need to, if you're going to have any kind of government, it needs to be extremely small, extremely localized, and it's from bottom up.
Yes.
And so one of the things that I've talked before about on this podcast is, go do voting. That apparently matters. But more so than that, is that it is so important that not only do you know who your elected officials are, but it's very important that they know who you are. Because they're out there trying to figure out, okay, what do people care about? What's going to get me reelected? What's important to people? And if you're watching this podcast, it's so important to talk to these people, call them up, send them emails, be annoying. Again, these people work for you.
Yeah,
okay?
They're your representative.
Everybody here, I'm sure, everybody who's watching this, I'm sure has a job of some kind or another, and you have a boss that you have to listen to. And if your boss is just sitting in the back corner, twiddling their thumbs, not doing anything, you're going to start slacking off, and you're not going to be doing a good job. Because you're not even sure what you're supposed to be doing at that point. And they might say, "Hey, what should I do?" And maybe some other guys out there saying, "Oh, you should do this thing." You're like, okay, fine, I'll do that thing.
Cool, yeah.
That's what someone's telling me to do. So you got to act like people need to start acting like the bosses that they are. They need to start actually talking to these politicians. Look, again, I'm not happy they're in these positions. I'd rather, again, not have these positions be filled, but we got to acknowledge the reality of what we are in. And so based off of that, talk to people, make sure they know who you are. They should not, it should be like that. I remember I was working at a job, and I'm sure we all do this where you're on your phone and all of a sudden the boss shows up and you're trying to hide it. Like, who hasn't done that? And that's the reality that they should have. When they start seeing that, oh, hey, RJ's calling me or RJ sending him emails, like, oh my gosh, I better make sure I'm getting my act together because, this stuff is getting very serious. Because, this guy actually cares about stuff. He's making things happen. He's making people know that what I'm doing. And that's part of the reason why I have this podcast is because I want to have a voice where I can have people saying, hey, I'd love to start naming people. I don't have people to name, but I would love to get people on here to start naming people, calling people out in the state government, in the local governments that aren't doing their job well, so that we can hold them accountable.
And I think critique.
Yeah.
Like we are so we can't. We're really bad at critique here. Really bad. Well, and I say these things because I care. Like, I want the community to be better. The people that are critiquing you are the ones that can be your ally. Because, like you're saying, like, you're pestering your elected officials. Well, an elected official could look at that as like, oh, this nuisance. Or they could be like, oh, this person cares. This person is going out of their way as a citizen, taking their time to communicate the things that they believe that should be done in their community. That is, I want my elected officials to recognize and acknowledge that as like, that's a good thing. That's like, you want that. Yeah. You want engagement. But I think you're right though. I don't think most of our elected officials have that sentiment.
Well, and this is something also I've noticed. So I was actually on a YouTube video where this guy was complaining about how some of the poor ways people in America are being treated, especially when you compare it to other countries like France. Okay, France may be on the extreme side, but that we don't have any even in America, you might get some kind of vacation time, but oftentimes it's looked down upon if you take the vacation time, stuff like that. And my response to this was like, yes, and the reason why is because if you had a French person dealing with any of the things that American workers were dealing with, they'd be in the streets rioting. Now, I'm not advocating for rioting. I want to make sure that's absolutely clear. My point is that Americans don't they don't get out of their seats. They don't get up and they don't say, hey, we got to make changes here. We got to actually, they don't make their voices heard. They don't, the last big protest there was the Women's March back in 2015, 16, somewhere around there.
16.
Yeah.
Or 17.
There hasn't been really anything like that.
No.
And it's.
Well, Black Lives Matter.
Well, yeah, but I don't want to get too much into Black Lives Matter. But that went in some different directions, and there's because the amount of violence that came from those.
Yeah, again, I'm just saying, just in terms of
sure,
people standing up.
But again, even having the both of those things were on the left. Okay, again, I think the whole left-right dynamic is so destructive. I think it's more of a top-bottom argument that's going on. So
it's a power dynamic.
I'm not trying to push anything here, but the right, they're not getting out and doing anything. The right will be so happy to complain and share memes on Facebook about here's what Fauci said, but to actually hey, I'm not going to be showing up to work today because I'm going to be out at this protest, and you guys can just deal with that. The right doesn't do that. Instead, they go say, well, we got to make sure we do a better job at the elections next year, and it is infuriating. And this is what we need to have. People just, when we talk about civic engagement, is not about voting. I think voting is among the least important things to do.
Yeah.
If you're saying that we're going to solve this for voting,
level.
You are that is minimal effort.
Well, and your voice, make your voice heard. It's no, it's not your voice. You're just putting your name in a hat for somebody who's going to do whatever they're going to do. They don't.
There's no accountability.
There's no accountability whatsoever.
No.
So it's just that's why I often say our representative democracy is a joke, because it is a joke. I'm not represented. I can't think of a politician that really represents me, really represents my interests specifically.
Yeah.
And so it's I'm just not, like you said, I'm not interested in this model anymore. And I think that's what's really powerful. I've found it very liberating, engaging in the idea that this government is an imagination. It is a collective imagination, and that the more you can pull yourself away from that and begin to realize, oh wait, there's a whole reality that's out there where I don't have to believe in it.
So I got to go feed the meter real fast.
Yeah.
I want to talk more about that. So if you could just hang on for a minute.
Yeah, let's do it.
I got to go feed the meter.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, here's the recorder. All right. So you're just saying how that it's. Sorry, let me catch my breath here.
You're good.
So you're just talking about how if we view the government as basically imaginary, that's kind of the best approach. And this is something that I started realizing too, and that is where if we look at certain states, California is a big one, where California basically said, hey, we're not going to enforce federal immigration laws. We're not going to enforce federal marijuana laws. A lot of other places have done this. And now the government's not going in, the federal government that isn't coming in saying, nope, you guys actually have to do that. They're like, okay, I guess that's fine. And this is something that I how far can this be pushed? When we started having Ohio and Texas, they started saying, hey, we're not going to be enforcing certain of the federal ATF laws, so some of the gun laws that are on the federal level. And it just seems like we're starting to see this, where the states are starting to go and push back on this idea that, hey, you guys don't actually have that much power, and you're not going to be able to stop us from doing this. And I think what we'll start seeing is that this is going to happen more and more and more, that the reality is, yes, like the federal government does have a lot of power. A lot of it's more bully power. Again, the whole idea of government is that it's just a monopoly on violence. And so we see this with the FBI and some of the things the FBI has done is a big area where this gets enforced. Also, the IRS is kind of another branch of that same idea. So I think that's going to be a big area where people have to be a bit more cautious on. But the states, I think, will start trying to push this more and more and say, hey, we're not going to be enforcing federal mask mandates or federal vaccine mandates or anything like that. And this is where we're going to really start seeing that the federal government is more of an imaginary thing. And it's going to start this big snowball effect to leave places. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, and I think you're seeing that too. I think just individually speaking, there's a really great Earth Day speech by Indigenous poet John Trullard, and I might be saying that wrong. I'm bad with names. I apologize to anyone watching this, but he said in this speech, the speech was called Acts of War, and he said he never understood why during the 60s people said power to the people. Power comes from the people, comes from your collection or your connection to the earth.
Yeah,
and I've took that to heart, and I've begun to see myself liberating myself from this idea of that these governmental structures are like the only way. That that I have to bow down to them by some sort of celestial force. And it's like, I think, no, I do not have to, especially if it does not earn my respect, the system itself.
Yeah.
And I think I think individuals are beginning to pull themselves out of sort of the like two-party paradigm, so to speak, and realizing that like, oh, it's theater. It's just keep you entertained, keep you distracted from actually doing the real work and where you actually have power. And my big focus, I think, moving forward in my community work is really emphasizing radical imagination, basically, and radical in the Angela Davis definition, to grasp by the root, to really have this sense of like this future, a vision of some sort, or a co-vision, if you will, with your community, and driving towards that, and not having to bow down to an external force, say a government, and basing all your decisions off of some predetermined laws that were established before you were even born.
Yeah.
And are out of date or were made for nefarious reasons. So, or both. Yeah, right. So I'm just not interested. I'm just not interested in bowing down to a government that doesn't represent me and doesn't represent my community.
Yeah, I mentioned before about how the left-right paradigm is bad, and this is because I agree with that idea that yes, I really hope more people are trying to step out of it. I'm not totally convinced. Yeah. I think that, and the reason why is I do see that a lot of people are, and they're starting to see some of these things, but I feel like I might be in a bit of an echo chamber, and that it just, because this is what I'm paying attention to, that it's not happening as big as I want. But the problem is that this whole blue versus red idea is, I very much believe that these, I call them just the establishment elites for lack of a better term, but that these establishment elites, these people who are not the Joe Biden who's in a seat, but the people who are controlling things, the people with special interests and all
party
these
heads.
All these people, that they have this approach that the more that we can get people, the actual people, the red people and the blue people, to go at each other, that the more we're going to start, like, we can start doing the other things we actually care about. Yeah. That I think that this whole left-right paradigm is pretty much just a fiction to create conflict. So that way we're focusing on what's happening over there, but then what we should be doing is looking up at what the establishment elites are actually doing.
It's theater. It is nothing more than theater. It is just a mechanism to distract If anything, the last like 4 or 5 years have indicated it's professional wrestling.
Yep.
I mean that is nothing more, and we are engaging in kayfabe. Do you know kayfabe?
I don't.
Okay, kayfabe is the fake storyline in professional wrestling. So it's the sort of the larger than life characters. And so what we're dealing with right now is what are we seeing that is real and what is actually kayfabe? What is just an engineered narrative from a governmental standpoint? And that, I think we're just at a point, like many of us, like including myself, as like, I'm not interested in playing in theater.
Yeah.
I studied theater, but I don't want my politics to be theater. I want them to be real. I want them to be engaged in factual reality, grounded in the resources that we're managing for that whatever governance that we're engaging in, not this absurd fantasy that we call representative democracy.
Yeah. So one of the things I started looking into, because is the way the government is structured. So I'll try and explain this better. So everybody talks a lot about the congressman. So you can talk to most, I hope at least most people could at least name one person either in the House of Representatives or the Senate. I would hope that could happen. It's probably going to be someone, like AOC, someone with a big brand name. Maybe it's going to be someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene because CNN loves talking about her a bunch. But most people could probably name at least one of those people. But what people don't often realize, I got curious. I started realizing that these federal agencies that are out there are ones that are actually having a lot more influence on how things happen, and that the politicians may not matter as much as I thought they did. And so I looked up, do you have any idea how many governmental agencies there are? Let me ask this question. Are there more governmental agencies or more people in the House of Representatives?
More agencies.
Yeah. And what's actually really scary is, from what I can tell, it's went up by about 50% in the past 4 years. Interesting. So, and this is something that I don't hear anybody else talking about this.
Yeah.
But all these different agencies that are doing these different things and how they're interacting and affecting things, and that these people they're like the people who work in these agencies, they're not generally being replaced by like as the administration changes. If we in 2022, a lot of people are predicting that there's going to be this red wave, that we're going to get a lot more people, Republicans into Congress. We're going to of course, we're not changing the president then, but 2024, hopefully they're predicting that it'll probably happen. We'll see what happens. But when it happens, yes, we're changing all these the committees in Congress. They're now going to get new heads that are now Republicans. So there's this change of what color people are in that case. But the people who work in all these agencies that are actually administrating all this, they don't change. Like they'll be in these places for years and years and years. And this is where I was kind of losing my train of thought here. But one of the things you mentioned is I think there's just so much lack of truth of what's going on, and that all of this is creating this. I think this is the bigger problem, is that people, like you talk about the theater, it's that the politics is a theater, and the people in Congress, the people in the Senate, all these people are just characters that are playing their little roles. But the thing that's actually happening is in this, again, it's over 600 federal agencies. Like it should be mind blowing to people that that's the case, and that's not what people talk about because again, it's all about the theater that's going on.
It's not as exciting.
No.
It's like, and that's kind of like with strong towns. Like when we're talking about infrastructure and like the infrastructure bill that was going through and all that stuff, and it's like we need to fix our bridges and all that, but it's like we're not getting into the fact that like when we engage and invest in these things, it's not a one-time cost.
Yeah.
You're signing up. You buy a bridge, you got to fix it.
Yep.
In 60 years. Like, or I mean, hopefully you're doing regular fixing over time before you let it, like, I don't know, crumble. And I think we're just that it's not exciting. It's not as exciting as, like, say, the drama.
This is I just remember the point I was trying to get at before.
Okay,
so it was that with how big this government beast is, it is not something that the average person can contend with. It's not something I can contend with. But what we can contend with, what it is manageable for us, is what we can do on local levels.
Yeah.
And that making sure that what's happening in our cities is that again, money's being spent wisely, and this is where Strong Towns comes in again. Is that the management of money? The biggest point about it is that the way that we're building cities is making cities go bankrupt, and it's making it's this massive Ponzi scheme. And there are better ways of doing things, and most of it people just are not aware that this is happening. And again, if we start stripping away the federal government and start stripping these things away, people start have to take these things seriously. There's no one else coming in to go and to solve these problems. To again, solutions for lack of a better word, but to come up with solutions to these problems and figure out how best to handle all these things that can come up. And so this is where again it's so important that to reiterate this whole point again, because I can't ever say it enough, is engage locally. Again, like you're saying, go to the roots, go to the cause, and see what we can do to make at least our communities better, because we're not going to be able to go and fix the country. No one person can do that. I'm not even sure if it's possible, but we can go and fix Sioux Falls. We can go and fix the state of South Dakota. We can fix things on a very localized level.
And I think the one statement or a phrase that's been with me lately is transform yourself to transform the world. And that's, I think, the big thing is we have to focus in on ourselves.
Yeah.
Like, how are you living? How are you getting about? How are you putting forth in your life? And how can you establish the conditions for wellness to emerge? And then I think you take that same idea and from a fractaled mindset, expand outward to your family, to your oikos, your 15 people, to your core neighborhood, to your then the larger neighborhood, so on and so on and so on. And establish those conditions. And that's, I think, the key, and why I push against, say, the solution word, the S word, is it's how do you engage in strategies that create the conditions for wellness? So there's pathogenesis, right? The emergence of disease. Well, there's another word called salutogenesis, sort of the antithesis, the opposite of pathogenesis. That is the emergence of wellness, of health. And so we, as Western thinkers, especially in our medicine, we've taken a very pathogenic approach, very invasive approach in terms of how we look at medicine. But that also goes into how we build cities and how we think about cities. We're very reactive to symptoms, issues, houselessness, drug use, what have you.
Yeah.
If we had a salutogenic approach through the emergence of wellness, we would be creating the conditions for wellness to emerge. We'd be gardening effectively. Yeah. We'd accept the ecosystem for what it is and then respond to it and then allow for more wellness to emerge. That would look something like, I would think, Zurich. I mean, it would be a place that's responding to what integrative human health looks like. Just kind of what's naturally occurring within human systems.
Yeah.
So that is, I think we as humans here in particular don't have a good sense of what builds the conditions for wellness. We just don't.
Yeah.
For as many hospitals we have, we don't really understand wellness.
It's interesting that you compared it to actual physical wellness, like the health of a city to health of people, because it's actually a discussion I want to have with someone where I really want to talk about the whole healthcare system in the United States, because I think it's again, it's one of those areas where I started looking into it recently, and it just blew my mind, the reality of it, where we have like what is it, 18% or 16%, I can't remember the exact number, somewhere around there, of our entire GDP, the United States GDP, goes to healthcare. Like,
how much was that?
18%. I can't remember if it's 18 or 16%.
18, I have seen it. Yes, 18%.
I'm pretty sure it's 18. Yeah, of our entire GDP in the United States goes to healthcare. This is something that should astonish people, and yet we're not even close to, like, we're around what, Puerto Rico in the amount of health, our standard of health for Americans. So that's a completely different topic I want to talk about, but I'll tease that. I'm trying to find someone to have a discussion with that about, because it's there's a lot to talk about there. Yeah. But yeah, I really think, again, that exactly what you're saying, that we need to start reframing the way that we look at the problems, trying to set things so that way we are, instead of just trying to fix the problems that we see. So instead of saying, hey, we have a homeless problem, we should go and, build more houses to put the homeless people in, figure out why is there a homeless problem, or why is there these drug problems, and try and go back up and say, hey, if we took action that resulted in this, let's back up and undo that action, and instead of adding more things on. And this is, again, going back to the whole problem with government. Government adds things on. We don't have sunset laws that get rid of bad things, policies. It's always, let's just keep building it up, and if we can just keep adding more to it, eventually we'll get to the right thing. When we got to look at all these incentives that cause the problems in the first place.
I think if we took more of a subtractive approach, it'd be better.
Yes.
Like we've mucked it up too much.
Absolutely.
We need to pull away. So I have to go shortly.
Sure.
But one author I want to bring up, because I think she's very much influences me, influences Chuck, it influences a lot of the folks in the Strong Town world, and her name's Jane Jacobs. Jane Jacobs she would call herself a radical centrist, basically, where she just got right to the bottom of the issue. She basically saved Manhattan Island from Robert Moses and being completely turned into a parking lot. Effectively, they were gonna run a highway through Union Square and basically through the center of the island.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah. So she went up against him. She was a writer, wrote for a number of different magazines and different books, and her most famous book is the Death and Life of Great American Cities. And the things she sees, like, her writing's beautiful. It's beautifully poetic, and it's just so rich. But she's looking at all the nuances of a neighborhood, all the deep complexities of what makes a neighborhood rich.
Yeah.
And that's, if we're going to talk about financial, we're going to talk about rich. We're going to talk about, like, say, a strong town. And what are the metrics of richness? Yeah, you could have a lot of money in the bank. That's true. You could be rich. But if you don't have friends, if you don't eat good food, you don't have great experiences, if you don't feel safe walking, if your kids can't ride their bikes in the street, like, is that a rich life? Is that a strong town? I don't think so. I think the complexity of a city should not be reduced to line items on a spreadsheet. But that's what we do. We're bankers. We're a banking community. Like, that's in any city, but especially here, we think in line items. And I'm just done bowing down to a government that doesn't understand that things are more complex than that. So, yeah.
I totally understand that. And frankly, I could keep talking with you for probably about another hour or 2 hours more. But I want to be respectful of your time. We already went over.
Yeah, we did.
Like way over.
Way over.
I was supposed to be out of the room an hour ago. So, I'm not being a very good host here. But I really appreciate you coming here, Jordan. Yeah. I'm going to have you back on sometime.
Yeah, sure.
Like I said, there's so much more that we can talk about.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for coming. And thank you to everybody at home for joining in. My name is RJ. This is the Rage Podcast. Have a great day.
Bye.